The restaurant was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses when a wealthy man leaned back in his chair, eyeing the young black waitress with a sly smirk. "You," he said, pointing at her, "play that old piano in the corner. Let's see if you can entertain us for a change." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others gleaming with mockery. She hesitated, her hands trembling as the spotlight burned down on her. She wasn't just a waitress, but no one here knew that. They only saw her skin, her uniform, and their assumptions. "Come on," the man sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Show us what you've got." She took a deep breath, walked to the piano, and sat down. The keys felt cold beneath her fingertips. Little did they know, what would happen next would leave the entire room stunned, and the man who tried to humiliate her would never forget this moment. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. Her name was Amara, and to the patrons of the upscale restaurant, she was just a waitress, a quiet, unassuming woman in a crisp white apron. But what they couldn't see was the fire beneath her calm exterior, a spark she had carried since childhood. Amara had grown up in a small, run-down neighborhood where dreams were luxuries few could afford. Her mother used to say, "Your gift is your voice. Whether it speaks through words, music, or action, never let it be silenced." But life had silenced her in its own way. Now she spent her nights balancing trays instead of melodies, tucking away the gift her mother believed in so deeply. Still, every time Amara passed the old piano in the restaurant corner, she felt its pull. She'd glance at the ivory keys, remembering a time when those very keys had been her escape from a world that saw her as invisible. If only they knew who she really was, what she was capable of. And tonight they would know. It was a moment she never expected, yet it would change everything. "Amara, table 5 is waiting," barked the restaurant manager, snapping his fingers as if she were a dog. She bit back the retort rising in her throat and hurried to the table, her forced smile masking the exhaustion behind her eyes. Sitting at table 5 was the man who would spark the night's unraveling, a rich, middle-aged businessman with an air of entitlement. He sat surrounded by colleagues, each as smug as the next. When she approached, his sharp gaze swept over her like she was beneath him, and he leaned back in his chair. "Finally," he said, rolling his eyes. "I was beginning to think you couldn't keep up." His companions chuckled. Amara simply nodded, asking for their order. But as she turned to leave, the man's voice boomed again, louder this time. "Hold on. I noticed that piano in the corner. Do you even know how to play, or is that just for decoration?" The laughter that followed cut deep, but Amara remained composed. I used to play," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her chest. "Well, let's see then," he said, smirking. "I'm sure someone like you could use a moment in the spotlight. Play something for us. Impress me." The mockery in his tone stung, but what made it worse were the stares from every corner of the restaurant, some amused, others pitying. Her chest tightened as the man continued. "Or are you all talk? Surely you don't expect anyone to believe you've got real talent." The room fell silent, all waiting for her response. Amara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel her heart pounding, a storm of anger and humiliation rising within her. She took a step toward the piano, her mind racing. This wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving something to herself. And as she reached the bench, she knew there was no turning back now. Amara sat at the piano, her back straight and her fingers hovering just above the keys. For a moment, the room held its breath, the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations fading into silence. She didn't look at the man who had mocked her. She didn't need to. She closed her eyes and let her hands fall into place as if they'd always belonged there. The first note rang out, soft and hesitant, like a whisper testing its strength. But then came another and another, weaving into a melody that seemed to pull the air out of the room. It wasn't just music. It was a story, one that spoke of struggle, of resilience, of dreams kept alive in the quiet corners of a world that didn't care to listen. Amara's hands moved with a grace that seemed impossible to those watching. The confidence, the precision, the raw emotion, none of it matched the image they had of her. She wasn't just a waitress fumbling through a tune. She was an artist who had been waiting, silently, for this moment to reclaim her voice. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, confusion turning to astonishment. Some stared in disbelief, while others leaned in closer, captivated. And the man who had tried to humiliate her. He sat frozen, his smug grin wiped clean from his face. But Amara wasn't done. This was only the beginning. The crescendo was coming, and with it, a truth no one in the room could ignore. The melody swelled, rising like a wave threatening to crash over the room. Amara's fingers moved faster, her body leaning into the piano as if it were an extension of herself. Each note struck with a power that demanded attention, demanded respect. People who had barely noticed her presence earlier were now on the edge of their seats, whispering to one another. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "I thought she was just a waitress." The murmurs grew louder as the realization began to ripple through the crowd. One of the man's colleagues leaned in, his face pale with shock. "I know that piece. It's by Liszt." "But how?" His voice trailed off, unable to reconcile the virtuosity before him with the image of the woman they had underestimated. The rich man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier confidence cracking. His eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, who might explain what was happening. But all he found were faces transfixed on Amara, captivated by the performance he had foolishly triggered. Then, someone near the bar gasped, pulling out their phone and whispering to their companion. "Wait, isn't that her? The girl who won the state piano competition years ago?" Heads turned, eyes widening as fragmented memories began to piece together a forgotten story. The man at the center of it all, the one who had mocked her, now looked as though he had swallowed a bitter pill. His arrogance was unraveling with every note, his laughter replaced by an uneasy silence. But Amara wasn't playing for him anymore. This wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about reclaiming the dignity that no one had the right to take from her. As the music reached its climax, the tension in the room was palpable. The truth was out there now, hanging in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to deny her worth. And with one final resounding chord, she prepared to deliver the moment that would change everything. The final crescendo erupted from the piano, filling every corner of the room with a sound so powerful it seemed to stop time. Amara's hands danced over the keys, her mastery undeniable, her passion pouring out in every note. The music didn't just play, it demanded to be felt. When the last note rang out, a deafening silence fell over the restaurant. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if breaking from a spell, the crowd erupted into applause. Some stood to their feet, clapping and cheering, while others wiped away tears, unable to contain the emotion her music had stirred. But Amara didn't soak in the applause. Her eyes were locked on the man who had dared to mock her. She stood slowly, turning to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. "You wanted to see what I'm capable of," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Now you know." The man's face was a mask of disbelief. His colleagues turned to him, their earlier laughter now replaced with awkward glances and murmured reprimands. "You should have known better," one of them muttered. Before he could respond, another voice rose from the back of the room, a woman near the bar. "I remember her now. She was the prodigy. Amara Daniels. She won that national competition years ago, didn't she?" All eyes turned back to Amara, her name now spoken with reverence instead of dismissal. The man, now visibly shrinking under the weight of the room's judgment, stammered, I didn't know. Amara stepped closer, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. That's the problem. You didn't care to know. You looked at me and decided who I was. But your ignorance doesn't define me. It never did. Her words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that had followed her performance. The man couldn't meet her gaze, his humiliation now complete. But for Amara, this moment wasn't about his shame. It was about her triumph. The room waited, breathless, for what she would do next. Amara stood tall, the weight of years of silence finally lifted from her shoulders. The applause swelled once more, but this time, it wasn't just for her music. It was for her courage, her undeniable brilliance, and her refusal to let prejudice define her. She gave a small nod to the crowd, then turned and walked away from the piano, her steps measured, her head held high. The man at the table, once so full of arrogance, sat in stunned silence, his colleagues whispering sharply in his ear. He looked up as if to speak, but Amara didn't give him the satisfaction of her attention. The manager approached her, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. "Amara, I had no idea you could— that was—" He struggled for words, but she cut him off with a quiet smile. "You didn't need to know," she said. "You just needed to treat me with respect." The room remained electric as she returned to her station, but everything felt different now. Patrons who had ignored her earlier now watched her with admiration, and whispers of her name spread like wildfire. Amara Daniels wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with, a reminder that brilliance often lies where we least expect it. Later that night, as she gathered her things and prepared to leave, a young girl approached her, clutching a napkin in her hands. "Miss Amara," the girl said shyly, "I want to play the piano like you someday." Amara knelt to the girl's level, her smile warm and genuine. "You can," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your talent is yours. Never hide it, no matter what anyone says." As Amara walked out into the night, she felt lighter, freer. She hadn't just reclaimed her voice. She had ignited something in everyone who had witnessed her courage. The story of Amara reminds us that true talent and worth cannot be silenced or hidden by prejudice or assumptions. It's a testament to the power of resilience and integrity, showing that even in the face of injustice, standing firm in who you are can turn humiliation into triumph. Respect is not earned by status or wealth. It is a right, and those who underestimate others often reveal their own flaws in the end. And there you have it, a powerful story that proves the strength of resilience and the danger of underestimating others. Amara's journey is a reminder that talent and dignity cannot be silenced, no matter how hard the world may try. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Justice Twist for more eye-opening tales of justice, redemption, and triumph. Together, let's continue to uncover the truths that inspire change.